All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session. I see in the comments already some people are asking if I'm going to be providing any bagels or coffee. Um, awesome enough. Michelle has already put in there, no, that I'm not, but Uber Eats and everything. That's funny that you put that because I was going to mention DoorDash. That is funny. That is excellent. But again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Michelle, for being here. Dr. Michelle Lillies with 911 Recovers, and take it away. This is going to be great.
Oh, sure. Thank you, everybody, for having me. It is such an honor to be here. I think when I presented in this in April, I truly was like, this is probably one of the most meaningful things that I've done in my career. So hi, Amy, or how are you doing? Switched up. Sorry. Okay, I can't get distracted by the chats. Okay, so today I'm going to be presenting on something I have literally never presented before. This is something that I sometimes talk about or I touch on in my presentations, but I decided this morning to really focus on something different. And there's going to be part of this presentation that just kind of talks about some of my own kind of personal journey through COVID-19 and what all of that has meant. And then thinking about kind of when all is lost, when we're like at the limit of our coping ability and strategies, what else can we do? So my presentation today is not Dare to Be Today, because that's weird. The presentation is actually Dare to Be Today. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we might be able to make that happen in our lives. Okay, so, oh, there it is. Okay. So the first thing I want you guys to do is grab a paper and a pencil because you're going to need it later. And while you're up, just get yourself some coffee and donuts and I guess Ritz crackers and some other things too. Whatever you want to eat or drink, go grab it now. But grab a paper and a pencil. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about writing this presentation because for those of you who know me, hi Pam, I could sit down and talk for 48 hours and probably have no problem. I could pull together a presentation pretty quickly, right? Because I always have much to say. Many, many words come out of my mouth. But I will say that in thinking about this presentation and what I wanted to talk about today, which would be a little bit different than what I always talk about, I struggled, right? I struggled. And in fact, I was still working on this last night. And again, for those of you who know me, nothing happens at 10 o'clock the night before something. This should have happened like 3 weeks ago for me, right? So what is the struggle, right? Because the struggle right now is real, right? We lack right now really any sense of predictability, control, or routine. Our problem solving, at least for me, and I would imagine most of you, is really on overdrive, right? We are kind of tapped to the max, right? All of the coping resources that we probably have practiced and reinforced over time have, for many people, been exhausted because regardless of what's happening in your comm center, we currently live in a cultural context that is very volatile. What's happening in the world right now is very sad. And for many of us, we can't rely on those things that help us manage our stress, like predictability, control, routine. And these are for things that, if you're already working in 911, it's something that you're used to, right? You're used to not having things be predictable or always under your control or routinized, and things are often novel. But now we're adding another, what I call saucy layer to all of the stressors. We were not built for this. Human contact is good for our biology and psychology, even if you don't like people. We are biologically and evolutionarily speaking social creatures. And when we don't see full faces, yes, we can still make eye contact with people, but when we don't see full faces, when we're not touching each other, when we're not getting that close human contact, it affects us biologically, physically, and psychologically, and emotionally. So we are in our bodies not built for COVID, for separation, for 6 feet apart. Zoom is not human contact. So I know people are being like, oh, I find Zoom to be really, rewarding. And I'm like, great, that's great. I don't, right? It's more screen time, which we know is not great for our brains. And you guys in 911 already have enough fucking screen time in your life. What you don't need is more screen time, right? It creates natural delays in our speaking and conversing with people, which makes things awkward and difficult. And it throws completely out of place our context, where we are. So we don't usually do work from our kitchen table, right? We're not usually, I didn't realize I'm a person until COVID-19. Nicole, you've always been a person. We are trying to do things out of our physical context. And that's actually really jarring for our brain, and reasons that I think we just don't really even need to get into. But Zoom it's not human contact. And it's not, while it is reinforcing to see people, it is not a substitute for the good old fashioned actual eye contact. Again, this is even more screen time for 911. And what we noticed, and what I've seen as a clinical psychologist, and it's based, I think, on very good empirical evidence, is that simple things now may be less rewarding or simply take longer, right? This is a natural impact of stress. And it's a natural symptoms of depression and anxiety. Now, what I will absolutely not say is, now everybody's got depression and anxiety because of COVID, right? But we do see it spiking, and we do know that at the present time, those rates are really high, right? Whether that means in a year we're going to have a really high incident rate of, say, depression, we don't know, right? We can't predict that. One, because we don't know what's going to happen with things like COVID or what's happening in the world right now. But also because we just can't really understand right now the long-term impact of this prolonged deprivation. But what we do know is that when we have this extra saucy layer of stress, when many people are having an amplification in previous symptoms of things like depression, anxiety, it takes up bandwidth, right? It's taking computing power out of our CPU, right? And so things are taking longer. It's harder to invest in them. It's harder to feel rewarded by them. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about my COVID-19 story. I talked about this a little bit in April, but I was in the midst of it. And, I think at the end of the presentation, Ricardo literally had me singing. So it says a little bit of something about my mental state in April, although I do like to sing, and I might sing a little later. But COVID started off for me with divorce. So I got divorced on, March 5th of this year. This was after, couples that are doing well don't get divorced, right? So this was, the tail end of what was, a challenging several years, right? So March 5th, my divorce was finalized. I, that night, flew out and was doing some presentations with Kim Turner out in California. And it was really funny because the first morning, I even said to people, I'm like, I'm in kind of a weird space because I just got divorced. And the first presentation was like 7:30 in the morning. People stood up and started cheering. And they're like, woo! And I'm like, oh, yes, okay, this is what divorce can be like, right? And you can celebrate it and it's okay. And somebody's like, it's like 190-pound weight off your shoulders. And I was like, you are right, right? So for 3 days, I was like, woo, woo, going through California, connecting with 911, talking about the science of wellness. And then, a week later, my kids never went back to school. Never. They've never gone back to school. And so the timing of this was perhaps not great, right? And for those of you who have been divorced, you probably realize that it's the gift that keeps on giving. You don't get divorced and then you're like, whew, glad that was over. You still have to parent with this person. And I've got 8-year-old twins, right? And just, my ex-husband doesn't feel as though it's our job to homeschool or to participate in e-learning. Great, right? So you guys, I'll give him your address later and you guys can send him some letters. So this meant that all of the e-learning was kind of falling onto me. And then there was transitions like, oh, he's got a girlfriend. And, as again, for those of you who are divorced, divorce is no joke, right? And it continues. And the nature of the stressors kind of continue over time, right? So this was happening in the context of COVID. For all of us, new role demands, right? So I am now teaching everything online at Northern Illinois University. And I oversee a course of 800 students in our Intro to Psychology course. The stories that I could tell you are maybe hilarious. I love the stories that I hear from 911. But for example, our first exam was last week. An online exam, they get a 60-minute window and then the fire alarms went off in the dorms, right? And then our platform went down. And then we have students, who are reaching out and being like, hey, just so you know, like, I haven't like logged into the system yet. So, when am I supposed to do that? And I'm like, 7 weeks ago, right? So there's just new demand. There's just new demands, right? That we're, once you get tired, you kind of teach in a certain way, you kind of get used to it, right? Many of you, there are routine parts of your job that once you get used to, now it's all out the window, right? You have new task demands, you have new schedules, you name it, right? There's role strain, right? So I saw this meme the other day and I can't stop looking at it. Like I said, my kids stopped going to school on March 12th or 13th, and they have never been back to school. They have been home full time, and it's been a blessing. It truly has actually been a blessing. So I make fun of it, but it is a challenge. As I mentioned, I have 8-year-old twins, and if you think that they can work independently through their asynchronous lessons, you are crazy. I was just telling Ricardo earlier, you might hear my kids upstairs because last night I got an email that was like, haha, this morning it's asynchronous, right? And then my kids actually do go back to school in person next week. And what the school decided is that they're going to do 2 hours and 25 minutes of in-person with no bus. Now, most of you are working, many of you are working parents or have kids who are grown. Tell me a 2-hour and 25-minute day where there's no bus service, right? What else are you going to do? The pickup line takes 45 minutes, right? And so to try to balance all these things is a challenge, which, by the way, if you have grown kids or you don't have kids, don't approach a working parent with kids right now and be like, I just don't know how you're doing it, because they're probably going to punch you in the face. I wouldn't punch you in the, well, I might punch you in the face depending on the day. Okay. And then there's identity threat right now, right? How we think about ourselves, how we think about ourselves professionally, how we think about ourselves personally, right now. And I'm not going to get really into politics, but how we think about our own kind of politics and what's going on in the world right now has left many, I would never, you don't know me very well. I'm pushed when pushed. I think many people right now, and I see this in my clinical work, I see it in the interpersonal relationships that I have with people. People are feeling very lost right now. And this is normal, right? This is a very normal feeling when we are pushed to the limit of what we can handle, right? Many people's worlds have been, kind of flipped upside down. Now, again, I'm not an essential worker. So when I say my kids have been home, well, so have I, right? So I can't relate in that way, right? But I think if I were working, if I were an essential worker outside of the home, the struggle would be different, but it's the same, right? You're pulled in 5,000 directions right now. Okay, so there's also the what team are you on? This is from Saturday. Again, I'm not going to get political because I know better, but certainly the level of stress out there right now with the election 1 month away is crazy. I think that this is particularly insane for public safety. Public safety is under attack. I think particularly police officers are under attack right now. And this is adding, again, just this additional kind of saucy layer of where do you lie, right? I'll just say from my perspective, I'm a college professor. So people assume about me that I am, kind of extra liberal and very blah, 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 which is kind of true, right? And it's kind of not true, right? But right now there's very much this, you're either with public safety or you're not, right? And if you're with public safety, then you politically lie here. So there's a lot of assumptions out there and a lot of just crazy ass shit associated with this election and all the civil unrest that's ongoing in our country. And then my son broke his arm like 3 weeks ago. So it's funny, you can see his broken arm on the left. They actually wouldn't do surgery for a week, so he sat around in a splint. And my child has pretty severe asthma. So for anybody who works for DUCOM, shout out to you because you have dispatched folks to my house several times in the middle of the night, either because he couldn't breathe or because one time I was out of town and my ex-husband gave him a peanut. He has a severe peanut allergy. And so, this is this is just another thing, right? And whether or not your child broke their arm in the last month or two, it doesn't matter. You can all relate to the fact that every time you start feeling as though maybe you're going to get something done, there's another thing that happens, right? I've also, in the last couple months, and I think what we're seeing right now is, and I apologize if you're offended by this gift, but I think it's hilarious because Dave Chappelle is my idol. What we see right now during COVID and during civil unrest, but particularly due to COVID, is very high spiking rates of substance abuse disorders or the recurrence of substance abuse disorders. My middle sister, who's 13 months older than me, is an addict and has, in the context of COVID, gone back to a very severe drug and gambling addiction, which sometimes gets me pulled back into all the BS. And so for those of you who have addiction in your home or have other individuals in your home who struggle from mental illness, I can sympathize. Right? The struggle is real. And how do you, because trust me, I'm not in 911 because I'm not smart enough. I don't have the cognitive skill set, but I've got the personality, right? I'm a helper. I'm a doer. I want to help people. I'm a little type A, maybe like a little A plus. But that's only because I'm so type A that I have to give myself the plus after the A. And so it's very hard when people are suffering around you to not try to jump in and fix it. Right? But for those of you who have addiction in your family, you'll realize that there's oftentimes almost nothing that you can do. Right? And I don't say that to be depressing, I say it to be real. So in the end, we have so many growth opportunities. So for those of you who were here in April, you heard me use the acronym AGO, which is another growth opportunity. Or if you're feeling extra spicy and saucy, you can call it AFGO, another fucking growth opportunity. Because I often use this with myself and with my clients and with my students to reframe when we're struggling, right? Because it's really important. What can a moment teach you, right? So if you can change your perspective from why is this happening to me to what is this trying to teach me about this moment or how I can cope or what my limits are or what's important to me, is really transformative, right? So the next time you have a challenge, truly, saying, you know what, this is AFGO, right? This is another fucking growth opportunity, but I'm not going to let it get me down, right? Because all we can do is grow, right? That's all we can do. All we can do is confront the challenges that are put in front of us and let them make us stronger, as opposed to lying down and surrender. Okay? So we have many, 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 many growth opportunities, but sometimes these really amazing growth opportunities outpace the repertoire of coping skills that we've developed over time. And that happens, right? We reach our limit. So when you've had your limit, what are some things you can do, right? So I talk about stress management, the science of wellness, PTSD, resilience. I talk about all these things within Illinois and across the country all the time, right? And a lot of the things that I typically talk about, we get to the point where it's hard to integrate all of those stress management practices, right? And I think people get into what I call kind of a self-care shame cycle, right? So it's just like they try so much self-care. I'm going to do all these self-cares, but you can't do all the self-care in one day, right? You can't sleep 8 hours and eat lovely meals and exercise for 30 minutes and meditate for 30 more because you'd have no time to do anything else, right? So, the goal of self-care is to pick one self-care goal a day. And it might even be a really small one. Like I'm going to do 5 to 10 minutes of meditation, right? And call it a win, right? But we get to the point sometimes where many of these kind of coping strategies that we've honed, that we've perfected over time, they still aren't measuring up. So when that happens, what do you do, right? And there are a number of things you can do, right? But I'm going to suggest one, okay? So I'm going to ask, And I would love to see that chat board light up. How often do you ask yourself, what do I have to do today? You get up in the morning, you're in the shower, what do I have to do today? Or what do I need to get done today? How often does that happen for you? Or you get up at 2 o'clock because you're a third shifter and then you're, eating breakfast, dinner at, I don't know, 8 o'clock at night. What are you thinking? Okay, well, all the time, every day, constantly, what do I have to do today? What do I have to do today? What do I have to get done today? About 10,000 times a day. Yes, Bailey, that is me too, right? Too many times to count, right? Every minute, every 30 minutes or so, all the time, every single day, right? Every single day, all the time, right? And I will tell you, and this is why I know you, right? Because I am you in terms of that personality, right? I get up in the morning and instead of taking a mindful shower where I enjoy the water, I'm running through the lists in my head, right? And I've got to do this and I do this and I do this and then I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this and I've got to this. If this doesn't happen today, it's going to be a problem. Even in my sleep, I also dream list. I, in my dreams, sometimes create lists, which is a problem. It suggests that part of it is my personality, right? But what I will argue also is that this is part of the culture that we live in right now, right? It's go, 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 right? Now, I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to ask you a second question here. What do I have to, when you ask yourself, what do I have to do today? And then you fail. How often does that happen? You ask yourself, what do I have to do today? And you have this list, and at the end of the day, you feel like you've failed. It's like having too many tabs open. Kristen, I love that, right? How many times do you build this list, and at the end of the day, how you're feeling is because you're feeling like you failed, right? Every day, right? Every day, also every day, I start twitching. Yeah. You got the eye twitch, the back twitch. That's actually shimmy. Every day, every single day, often. Yeah. Right? We are rushing through our lives, building lists. And but there's always tomorrow. Thank you, Wes. I appreciate it. And Tim and Wes, you guys are buddies, right? You have like the same attitude. And that's great. That's a great attitude to have. There's always tomorrow, right? But we often get to this point where we have these goals and we have these things that we want to accomplish every day. And we put so much stock to them and then we fail. Now, let me ask you another quick question. What gets in your way? What does that failure look like? And I'm going to just, as you guys start typing in there, I'm going to tell you what failure sometimes look like for me until I started rethinking this a little bit. Failure was not getting something done because I was getting interrupted every 15, 20 minutes by children, right? So in the midst of COVID, how I was feeling is I never get anything done. This is horrible, blah, 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 right? Yourself, me, life, exhaustion, right? Crisis of the hour. Yeah, there's crisis of the hour. Yep. And sometimes we get in our own way, right? Leaving the list on your counter. I do that too. So I started carrying around with me my phone, which is also a problem, right? So what does that look like? But just really think about it. When you say you get in your own way, right? And what is that? Because what you needed that day, what you needed was to actually rest for that 30 minutes instead of doing something. But then what you're saying to yourself is, I failed. But really what you needed was that 30 minutes to fucking breathe, to take a breath, right? To go on a walk, right? Again, I can only speak from my personal experience, but what failure was, like when I stepped back and said, I am failing at this, right? I'm failing at this. Like all these things that I typically do as Dr. Lily, and I'm not getting them done right now, or not getting them done to the level that I want to get them done, right? And I stepped back and I thought to myself, what is this failure? And then what I thought about is, holy shit, this isn't failure, right? I'm supporting my children through their education, right? I spent 45 minutes on the phone doing a crisis session with somebody, right, who's struggling right now, who got shot at last night, right? I'm I failed to reach these goals today, right? Because again, there's that crisis of the hour, right? Well, we're in crisis management. That's our job, right? I would imagine that oftentimes if you fail, and I use quotes, that it's not that you actually failed. It's that you did it in service of another person, right? And I would argue that that's not fail. That's not a fail. We are so used to, at this point in our lives, doing product-driven living, right? It puts our worth on outcomes or products. You know, what can we get done? What can I show at the end of the day, right? But these products are often arbitrary. They're often defined by others or defined by society. It's very easy, I think particularly easy right now, particularly with social media, to feel like a failure, right? So again, I got kids at home, but I'm a full-time working single mom, right? So I've got my kids 75% of the time, right? And so I am a full-time single working mother who works at NIU, that transitioned. I have some side gigs, and I've got two very precocious children who love to talk. They talk constantly, right? So they're always talking, right? And it's very, very easy to get pulled into Facebook culture, right? Oh, well, these people are home with their kids and they made cupcakes today, right? Or, oh, hey, I just wrote this book, or I did this, or I did that, and like, you should do that. Great, I would love to do that, right? But that's not my life right now, right? So our outcomes, our products are often, if you really step back and looked at them, they're not always defined by us, and they're not always personally meaningful, right? The list can become endless, truly. The list can become endless. And living a product-driven life means that we are often relying on avoidance and suppression to cope with conflicting emotions. Because we often get pulled into being driven to create products that are not personally meaningful. In order to do that, we have to squelch the conflicting emotions when you realize that it's taking away from maybe your kids or your relationship or yourself, your own well-being. Right? And so we have to go oftentimes into this kind of avoidance, suppression, white knuckle mode, right? Because what we're trying to do is shut down those conflicting feelings. Because we know inherently, on some level, that we're not living a value-driven life. And sometimes it's just actually good old-fashioned avoidance, right? So I saw this meme, I should have pulled it up here, but it said something like, the constant need to stay busy is often a trauma or stress-based reaction, right? When we have distress and we're afraid of confronting it, it can look sometimes a lot like workaholism, right? You work, it's this distraction, right? Because if you had to sit and actually feel, it feels scary, right? So work, do all these things to avoid sitting with other more complicated, difficult emotions, right? And these products can actually conflict directly with our values over time. So I'm going to challenge you guys. So the next time you say to yourself, what do I want to get done today? I'm sorry to hit close to home, Peggy. Stop. So now you know, right? Now you know what it is. Because honestly, when you ask yourself that question most days, it is probably so automated, you don't even realize you're doing it, right? But now you're going to notice it, and you're going to stop. And what you're going to say to yourself instead is, what do I want to be today? Not what do I want to get done today? What do I want to be today? And you need to start, and if that's a hard question for you, right? Because for me, it's at the tip of my tongue, right? So compassionate. It's always what I want to be. Compassionate and patient. And I'll talk about my own values in a minute as an illustration. Family, happiness, right? So that's it, right? That's what I want to be today. And all the other products and outcomes can flow from that, right? But we have to be living consistent with our values. And we'll talk about this just a little bit more. I don't have tons of time, but because I could talk all day long, again, as if you can tell. So what is a value, right? I talked about this value-based living, right? Values refer to the activities that give our lives meaning, okay? A value is, you can define it as a principle, a standard, a quality that you consider inherently worthwhile or desirable, okay? And it is not a goal. You don't accomplish a value, right? It's not like, I value happiness, and then it's a goal, right? And you're searching for your goal, you know, because this is the fact of the matter is if you are constantly chasing happiness, you will fail, right? Because even if you get to that point, there's going to be the next moment that challenges you or that makes you have to rethink happiness, right? Or what gives you happy. We're constantly evolving people, right? And happiness is an emotion. And by definition, emotions are fleeting. So if you're chasing happiness as a goal, it's a problem. Because unfortunately, you're probably going to fail. And then failing at it makes you feel even worse, right? So values are not goals. They're guiding principles. You can think of it like a compass that you can use to help determine the course of your life and choose intentionally which activities you engage in. Values help you make choices on how to spend your time and live your life. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to fast forward here a couple slides. We'll get there. It's not like you can just be like, I'm going to be compassionate and I'm not going to go to work, right? That doesn't work, right? But can you go to work and focus on being compassionate, right? As opposed to going to work and thinking, I am here and I'm stuck here and I'm dealing with this crisis and I'm not getting X, Y, or Z done at home, right? It helps us live in service of it, right? It makes things more naturally reinforcing and rewarding. Okay? So we're going to do values assessment because some of you, it might be on the tip of your tongue, it might be very clear what your values are, right? For some of you, sometimes it feels like they're lost, right? So we're going to take just like a minute and you're going to write this on your pencil and paper, right? Or on your pencil with your paper. On your paper with your pencil is really usually how that works, but you can be creative. When was the time that you were so absorbed in what you were doing that you lost track of time? What were you doing? And then the next is, what activities are the most meaningful to you? And you have to be honest. When you're done with those activities, how do you feel? So we're going to take just like a minute. Like just a minute to do this because I want to make sure that we get to some of the later material and offer opportunities to ask questions. You don't actually have to write it down, but what we know is that when you take a pencil or pen and you write things on a piece of paper, not when you type them, but when you put them on a piece of paper, it is valuable. It does some things in your brain that don't happen when you're typing, right? Or when you don't write things down. Just, we won't get into all that right now. And I should stop talking to let you focus, but you guys are really good at multitasking, so I'm not worried about it. But when was a time that you recently were just so absorbed that you lost track of time and you thought, oh shit, it's 6 o'clock, right? What are most meaningful to you? And let me just be really clear at the moment, right? There are things that I love doing with my children, and there are things that I don't. Right? And I'm just being super honest, right? If you were to say, what's a meaningful activity to you, right? And, I think the typical mom response is spending time with my kids. Well, that is true most of the time, but sometimes it's not, right? I don't like you learning, right? So what are the most meaningful times that you spend with your kids? For me, my most meaningful time spent with my kids is when we're sitting and learning things together. Because my kids love to learn, and I love to learn, and I love to teach, right? I am not crafty, right? So if you're to be like, sitting and doing crafts with my kids, that might be great for you, but for me, not so much, right? Okay, so just think about those. Have those in your mind, okay? So think about what this tells you about your values. Okay, and you might actually be able to just right now write what your values are based on these activities. But sometimes people benefit from having kind of a list, right? So these are common values. This is not an exhaustive list, right? Because there could be things on here that Some of these things might be applicable to you, or it might be missing things. So think about it. I'm going to go back here. What are your top values? Pick 5 of them. Okay. What is most important to you? And be honest with yourself. There's no shame in this game, right? The goal is to figure out what speaks to you, what's meaningful to you, right? I think sometimes people would say, like for me, you know, like a value of mine is achievement. It is advancement, right? And there's no problem with that, right? But I'm going to talk about where that lies in my values in just a minute. Okay? And all of these, you might look at all these and be like, ooh, right? That's important, and that's important, and that's important. I'm going to pick 10 of them, right? And you can go ahead and do that, right? But then I'm going to challenge you to rank them, right? You're going to have to rank them. So I'm going to talk about, back to the other slide real quick. Do you still need this, Teresa? Okay. I'm going to move on, but I can always send this to you guys after, so you can always email me. I'll have my contact information at the end. So these are the common values. Okay. So these are my values. I'm just going to use myself as an example, right? If you were to force me to pick 5 of these, they would be compassion, patience, which I see is similar, creating and sharing knowledge. I'm an educator, right? I've been I've been preaching and professing to people since I was 2, apparently. So it's a core value. Health is very important to me. I was a runner for many, many years. I have a long family history of health problems that are unexplained and strange. And so health is very important to me. Independence and freedom. I think that probably high on the list of any recently divorced person. And spreading joy, right? Simple, spreading joy, making people laugh, right? My mom was like, well, if you ever get tired of being a psychologist, like you're probably going to try to be a stand-up comedian because you're kind of funny, but more importantly, you think you're funny. So see, I don't even need feedback from you guys. I can just make myself laugh, okay? So these are the values, right? But I have to sit back and do it because these are hard, right? What's most important? And if I'm honest with myself, if I sit back and think of the times that make me the most content, and I'm not going to say happy, the most content is when I feel like I spread joy. Now, you have to think of that as like kind of conditional, right? Is then my job to just spread joy to everybody? No, actually, like for me, spreading joy is first most important for my family and then my friends and then other people, right? But that's my goal, or not my goal, sorry. See, it's tricky. It's my value. It's my number one. I want to spread joy. I want to make other people feel good, right? And then compassion and patience, right? Hopefully I make them laugh. And if they don't laugh, then I want to just be there, right? I want to give people the space and I want to facilitate their own growth, right? Their own wellness, right? But sometimes that takes a lot of compassion, right? It takes a lot of patience. And that's not just compassion for other people. It's compassion for myself too, right? Because guess what? I know many of you struggle with being compassionate with yourself, right? That's part of being type A, right? Health, right? Creating and sharing knowledge. Now, as an academic and as part of my role in education, you would think that this is my number one value, right? And you would actually, I would have anticipated, and this was actually, I think, has always been my number one value, right? In my mind, right? Like, oh, this is my most important value is to do this. But this was my most important value when I had time to take care of 1, 2, and 3, and I didn't realize it. Right? This is a really important value for me. It's number 4, but I can't do that well, right? If I'm not getting 1, 2, and 3. So when we are tapped to our limit, when we are kind of backed into a corner, right? Sometimes doing this values assessment gives us insight into that, right? Creating and sharing knowledge, I would have said, is always my number one value, right? Until COVID, right? COVID has changed me immeasurably, good and bad ways, I guess. But I don't think I really realized that compassion and patience were such a high value for me because I had plenty of time to deal with it. Like I had the time and mental space to do that, to value that, to prioritize that. I hope that makes sense. And then independence and freedom are number 5, right? Again, going through the divorce, it was like, freedom, this is so important to me, right? So important to me. And it is. But it's also very important to me to first spread joy, compassion, right? I see people are having problems with the camera, and I wish that I could do something about it, but I lack all technical skill, which is also why I am not in 911. So hopefully you can at least hear me. Okay, so in this value, okay, thanks. Are you living a values-driven life, right? If you are, you're actually probably I would make the prediction that you're actually generally pretty content and happy, right? If you are not, then there's probably something that you notice. Stress, anxiety, depression or discontent, substance abuse. And I'm not saying clinical depression. I'm not saying clinical anxiety. I'm not talking about alcoholism. I'm just talking about symptoms of these conditions, right? I have a really good friend of mine who's been pulled in 7 million ways recently. And he's just like, I'm just unhappy. I'm depressed. And I said, no, your values are completely out of whack. The things that you care about the most right now and the people that you're most worried about letting down are the exact people that you're letting down by not being able to say no to things. Right? Can you live in accordance with your values? What changes can you make? But how do we balance the two, right? Or has Dr. Lilly just lost it? And the answer might be yes. And if that's the case, then okay. We also can't just throw our hands in the air and say, well, today I'm just going to be, right? I'm going to be compassionate and that's all, right? Or at least we can't do that every day, right? We still have to work. We still have things we have to do. But what are your values? Can some products or activities or things that you don't enjoy either be in service of your values, or can you realign things to be more in service of your values, right? So I'll give you an example. Do I love to online teach at NIU? No, I do not. I'm just the other day, we had a student who has confirmed COVID, and I got all these messages from the university that were like, this student in your class, and this student in your class, and this student in your class, there was like 20 students in this class, are now in quarantine or have COVID, blah, 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 blah. And it turns out that kid, the patient 0, we think, because he was home, decided to have a party. And they all went, right? And then all of them were like, well, we can't take the exam now because we're in quarantine. I'm like, you have internet, right? It's an online class. So that type of thing, I think probably 4 months ago, would have had me rage crying in my bathroom, right? I don't rage cry in my bathroom, except for on Tuesdays. And it kind of hit this point of being like, these students, they don't get it, right? They don't get it, right? And that stinks for them, right? They're kind of at a disadvantage. And what's more important to me is that we're protecting people's health right now. So I'm not going to come down on them. I'm not going to just fail them all, even though there's a small part of me that really wanted to, right? And so it's, teaching right now, while not rewarding in the way that it has been in the past, is in service of my value of spreading compassion and spreading knowledge, right? There have been things in the last probably 4 or 5 months that I have let go, that I said, you know what, I can't, no, I'm not doing this because it's not consistent with my values, because it's pulling me away from having the emotional energy to be compassionate and to spread joy. Say no. Seriously, it's okay. I know you don't want to say no. I know so many of you don't want to say no, but learn how to say no, right? I think one of the biggest reasons why our lives become inconsistent with our values is because we take on things simply out of obligation. as opposed to making intentional choices about what will provide us meaning in life. So how else do we balance these two, right? One of them is radical acceptance. Radical acceptance comes from the dialectical behavioral therapy literature. And when all else fails, right, and we want to fight against something or change something, and it's a non-winning proposition, sometimes what we need to do is just sit in radical acceptance, right? And we need an ocean of compassion and an abundance of grace, right? And this is not just for other people, because you guys are really freaking good at giving to other people. But this is also for ourselves. We need radical acceptance, an ocean of compassion, and an abundance of grace. And my team of 10 teaching assistants who are trying to manage these 800 fucking students, sorry, but this is something we literally say at the start of every one of our team meetings. Radical acceptance, an ocean of compassion, and abundance of grace. Okay? No one has ever been harmed by grace. I promise you. People have been harmed by being criticized, being hurt, being judged. No one has ever really been hurt by grace. As far as I know, if you have an example, let me know, right? Providing grace to people is not neglect. So when I say an ocean of compassion and abundance of grace, some of my TAs, sometimes they'll come back and they'll say, yeah, but we're letting these students, get away with things. I said, yeah, and if they keep trying, then we're going to say something, right? But right now, especially right now, maybe not out forever, right? But for right now, we're going to have grace, right? And we're going to accept that through this grace, they're hopefully going to discover something about themselves, right? Because we don't just offer it like, oh, here's great, here's an A, right? You didn't take the exam, here's an A, right? But what we said is, I understand probably that things are really hard for you right now, and we're going to give you an extension, no questions asked. And next time, if this happens, we're going to have a conversation about what you need to change in your life to improve, right? It's not neglect, right? It opens the door for understanding, right? For growth. Grace doesn't cause anxiety. Again, it opens the door for reflection. But grace takes a leap of faith to accept that it's not going to cost you, right? If you give grace to another person, I know some of you are thinking, you give so much grace and people will take advantage, right? And sometimes they will. But who cares? Honestly. Right? As long as they're not taking advantage even in terms of a way that's harming you, that's their life, right? That's their life. It's not yours, right? And it's not a zero-sum game. If I give you grace, there's none for me, right? And when I talk about grace that's directed internally, it's not going to cost you. I guarantee you. I know, because I've worked with public safety for a long time, and I work with trauma psychologist trainees who are actually very similar in their makeup, right? The fear is that if you extend grace to yourself or you extend self-compassion to yourself, that you will take your foot off the gas, that you will fail, that you will not achieve your goals. I know it's out there for some of you, it's in your thing. If I stop and extend myself grace or compassion, it's going to interfere with my goals, right? But it actually doesn't, and let me tell you why. What we need to be doing is what I think we need to be doing. You can do whatever you want, right? We need to be engaging in intentional living, right? Intentional living in service of our values versus endless doing. Can you separate what you do from what you produce? And can you direct your life to serve your values? Now, here's the funny thing. This is the irony of being versus doing. You actually get more done. And I know you might be like, nah, how's that possible, right? I will tell you that the gift of refocusing on my values has actually freed up a whole shit ton of processing space in my brain, because we're not fighting things. We're not extending extensive energy feeling like a failure, feeling like we have to go, feeling like blah, blah, blah. And I'll give you an example of this, right? So when my kids first got sent home for e-learning and all this, whatever, it was just like it was like shit show, right? And it was like, you feel completely consumed and depleted, right? When I refocused on my values and I'm clear that my goal is to spread joy and then to have compassion and patience and then focus on my health and blah, 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 blah. How I start my day is just a little bit different. Like it's not that different, right? But when I wake up in the morning, I make sure that that I have extended some joy, some love, some compassion, some attention, something, right? So that they feel heard, seen, loved, cared for. It's like 5 to 10 minutes of my time, right? And if they have a moment where they're struggling with school or they need something, I pause my life, and whoever I'm speaking to sometimes has to wait just like 2 minutes, as opposed to I was like, just wait, I'll let you know, blah, 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 right? But by then, 30 minutes later, my kids are behind in school. They're frustrated. They don't know what they're doing. And I have had an unproductive meeting because my kid has been sitting at the table giving me like side eye the whole time. And I'm like, shit. And then I'm getting anxious, right? So I'm not really paying attention to what's happening in this meeting. And I'm kind of half paying attention here. And nobody's happy, right? Nobody's happy. But with small changes in my kids starting the day, knowing I'm there for them, knowing that I can, and again, I recognize this is not going to be the case for everybody, right? It might be at work, right? But I'm just giving an example, right? That if I take a minute to help them, it stops a whole cascade of negative affectivity for many people, me, my kids, and whoever I'm trying to talk with or meet with, right? And I promise you that in the midst of all of this, I've had some of the most productive months of my life. But it takes intentional decisions that align with your values, right? And that's what makes life meaningful. Okay, so we got about 4 minutes for questions. These are all my many inboxes. So, and I use my work email at NIU. I run 911 Recovers, which is a telebehavioral health practice offering evidence-based treatment for PTSD, stress, and anxiety for public safety and their family. I have a consulting practice where I offer predominantly organizational assessment, but also some intervention when agencies are struggling. Saving Blue Lives is a grant-funded training that we're doing for law enforcement in the state of Illinois. And it's a 2-day training on PTSD, suicide, resilience, and peer support. We also just, my co-presenter from Saving Blue Lives and I, Sergeant Sean Curry at Peoria PD, Amy, high five. So her husband's the chief of Peoria PD. We actually just published a white paper publishing the most recent rates of PTSD in law enforcement, which is currently estimated at 47%. And we are now at the point where we're trying to distribute that white paper. So if you want access to it, just shoot me an email. So I'm going to stop talking at the moment, which is hard for me.
Hello. Excellent session as always. This is good stuff here. I think so. What's really good about this is, again, the fact that we're able to interact in real time. So
I love it.
There are no questions in the QA section. However, I think it's because you were going back and forth with people already. So that's good. That's the thing.
Yeah.
The fact that it was interactive, that right there, that was the main part. And I mean, you can see all the comments as I'm watching. You're doing your presentation and you're answering stuff at the same time or commenting on certain things. And I thought, man, she's got this shit. Very nice.
Well, I've had to learn, right? And the fact of the matter is that, like I said, I don't have the cognitive skill set. Like, to be a 911. But I do have multitasking pretty well down at this point. Like I can have many conversations at the same time, which is what happens when you get used to having conversations in your own head. Right, Ricardo? Come on.
Yep, a few. Now, I do want to mention something really quick. So, you had put up that to write down the lists and stuff. Something that I don't remember the complete wording, but it was something that I got consumed with, and I'll be honest, it was this. It was creating like all the promo slicks and just doing everything that I was doing and adding stuff to the website, and then that there were a couple days where I had to, well, I would say I had to force myself to kind of take care of myself. No, it was my body telling me you have to. My body decided to slightly break down on me a couple times. But
yeah, that's what happens, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But the other thing, though, when you're talking about values and when you're listing them, one of the other things that I completely lost track time on and kind of consumed what I was doing was creating commercials with my daughters. We were outside. I posted a video on it, but we were outside, and we did this commercial about, and people may have seen it on social media, but it's called Jones Barbecue and Foot Massage. And we created our own commercial to it, and it was amazing. So that's actually one of those things up there at the very top of values and such. And
I bet it was amazing. And you've got all that equipment, so it's like professional quality. My kids want to make a movie, and and I said, okay, we can make a movie, and we'll make some sets and costumes. And I'm not crafty. But I said that I would do it as soon as they have a script, and they're like in their breaks during school, they're actually working on their movie script. So
nice. That is awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing that when it comes out.
Oh yeah, me too.
Well, thank you so much again, very much for being on and doing this session. And I threw your link in there as well for 911recovers.com. Everyone, make sure to check out everything that Dr. Michelle Lilly is doing. And you've got all that information there. You can always come back anytime you want to check out the session in replay mode on demand at your leisure. So again, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we are going to be headed to the next session now. Have a good one, everyone.
Wait, Ricardo, no singing? There's going to be no singing?
I was hoping you were going to say something really quick before we went. So what song are you going to sing today? Because we did sing one last time. Bye.
Baby, bye.
It's so horrible that I don't remember the rest of the the lyrics, but
I don't either.
I have been known to do some singing badly in my car to some boy band songs.
I'm aware. I'm going to start having like sing-offs with you. So yeah. All right. Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.